introducing back, I'm gonna introduce you back to everyone, but if I think they have known from the documents that we sent to them. So Liz is, as everyone knows, for these 3 days, is a very close friend of Ken, who you know, and also the founder of the Gaia Foundation. And what is interesting that I read is you've created a method of reviving indigenous knowledge and practices, which is very close to me, which I do in my work that I do.
Oh, lovely.
So we would like to hear more from you, but before that, I'll also we'll let you know what we did over these 3 days or today. So we just got back. Everyone just got back from a nap. We
Good.
We have this session where we do nap as a method to rest as a practice, resting for our ancestors, resting for those who.
Beautiful.
And we also did a short program to look into what we did for the last 3 days in our topics of earth-centered governance and also regeneration practices, where it's involved, the stories are involved, the system. We look more into the system and how the system goals can be changed. Yeah, so that's what we did over this morning and that few days. So would like to about you.
You'd like to, sorry, the line just went then. You'd like to what?
I'd like to hear more about what you do.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. I wanted to see, so first of all, greetings, everybody. It's such a privilege to be with you. I wish I was physically there in your wonderful, warm place. So I feel very honored to be with you for this time. And I was wondering if we could start with a short meditation to become present. It's one of the practices we do. And given that all of us have been like, oh, is this technology going to work, including myself this morning, I thought maybe we could start just with a little breathing and a little meditation exercise that we do, which is part of really our learning with Indigenous people. And then I am going to try and tell you a short story of a very long story, which is the challenge. So I'll do my best. And if you can just tell me when I'm about 20 minutes in, just, stories have a spirit and you can get carried away. So I just need some support if after 20 minutes, just say, okay, 10 minutes left. Okay. So I'm going to tell 3 bits of a long story. One is starting in the Amazon. The other one is how the Amazon and Africa connected. And then the other one is about Thomas Berry, who came up with the idea of Earth Jurisprudence. And then I thought we could have some reflection time. And then I gather you would quite like to show the Custodians of Life film. Is that so, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
You'd like to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we could see that and then see if we have a little bit of time for reflection, because that brings up quite a lot. So we'll see, and then I've got a lovely poem to end with, but see how it goes. And if you guys can just keep me on track, because I can get carried away.
All right.
Is that okay?
So also
Good.
moderating with me is Nat, my colleague Nat here. So both of us
Great.
will be
We'll
having this
keep an eye on
conversation.
me.
Yeah.
And I can see on your video it's TCR Media Productions, but I didn't get your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. That's my bad habit. So my name is Noel.
Noel.
Yeah,
Okay.
Noel. And
Great.
also with me is Natasha,
Yeah.
who will be the
Great.
moderator.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay. So you guys keep an eye on me, okay?
All right.
Okay. Right. So let's start. Are you all happy to start with a little meditation? Because I can see we're all still settling a bit. Is that a good idea?
Yep. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, cool. So I can see some of us are sitting on the floor and some of us are sitting on chairs. So if we can just get comfortable wherever we're sitting, and if we could sit as straight as we can with our spine straight. So if we can imagine we're a puppet on a string, and so the string is holding us up and our shoulders are dropping nicely down, and we're sitting comfortably and firmly on our chair or on the floor with our legs relaxed, our shoulders relaxed, our arms relaxed. And if we can close our eyes and just take a few deep breaths to just bring that wonderful oxygen from the trees into our lungs. Take a few deep breaths. And breathe out and in a few times. And then just let our breath settle so that we feel the rhythm of our breath. We're breathing deeply and slowly. We're feeling our bodies in their beautiful alignment with a straight spine. And our legs and our arms relaxed. And for a moment, just stay with our breathing. And just notice the wonder of our bodies breathing us, really. We don't have to make an effort. We can just feel the breath coming and going. We feel our breathing. We feel the rhythm. And we give gratitude for the wonder of our body, knowing what to do, knowing how to breathe, knowing how to take the oxygen around our bodies, knowing how to release the carbon dioxide. And then if we take our consciousness out a bit and we remember how the trees too are breathing, and they are breathing the carbon dioxide out. Sorry, the oxygen out for us to breathe in. And they breathe the carbon dioxide in. Feel that wonderful connection, how we're woven into each other's lives. As the trees give to us, and as we give back to them. How the oxygen and the carbon dioxide circulate between us in this wonderful balance. Feel that connection with the beautiful trees and the plants outside, and how we're woven into each other's lives. And give thanks for that wonder, that beauty of how our living earth keeps us all in relationship. And now, as we sit here, to remember that each of us are sitting here now thanks to our parents. And our parents are there or were there because of their parents. And their parents were there because of their parents. And so we feel behind us, holding us, this growing pyramid of humans who we are related to, who we are connected to. Our lineage going back and back and back. More and more people behind us who are our lineage, who are our ancestors. And as we feel held by that long lineage, we remember that we as humans evolved from the primates. And as we go back further, we go back to the beginning of life, to the first cell, all of which are in our lineage, all of which journeyed over huge amounts of time, feeding into who we are now sitting here. Feel the strength of energy that comes into us from that long, long journey of life, from the first cells to all the different forms of life that led into our human lineage and into ourselves. For a moment, feel the wonder of that. Feel the enormity of that long, long story of Earth, of Mother Earth, who holds us now as we sit here. And as we feel ourselves embedded in this long journey, in communion with the trees, and in communion with our bodies that hold us healthy and firm at this moment. And we give gratitude for these wonders of life. And we now take a few breaths again. We come back into the room. Come back into our bodies, sitting on the chairs or on the floor. And when we're ready, we can open our eyes and be present with each other. Okay.
Beautiful. Thanks for that.
You. Yeah. Just helps us, isn't it, when we do these things to become present here and now. So now I'm going to begin with the first part of the story. And as I said, it's a short story of a long one. So it begins with me finding myself sitting in the Amazon forest, which I think you all know, way over on the South American continent, with a group of shamans and indigenous people, a small group of about 6 or 8 people, and a few friends. Somebody called Martine, who had been visiting the indigenous people for quite a number of years. And they had asked him to bring a few friends who he trusted to sit with them because they wanted to talk to us about what they were worried about. And so Ricardo Marin was one of the big shamans in the area who I got to know very well, and he was holding the group of shamans, and they shared their concerns with us. They said, we've called you here because we've been thinking amongst ourselves and talking a lot about where we are right now with our people and with the forest. We're finding that we are really concerned whether our traditions will continue into the next generation. And we're seeing our forest disintegrating, our rivers not holding the fish that they used to hold. Our communities are also disintegrating. And so we are really concerned. Are you okay? Am I hearing okay? Are you hearing me okay?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Okay. I'm speaking loud enough. Okay.
Yep. Very good.
So, so he said, we're really concerned about what is happening. And we want to share with you what we're seeing. Because, as you know, my team, who they knew, the missionaries have come into our territory. And they've set up their churches, they've set up shops. And they've also taken our children off into what they call boarding schools. And so what we're seeing is that our children are not learning about our traditions. They're not learning with us anymore. And they're learning these ideas that when they come back, they don't respect our traditions. They don't respect our traditional ways. In fact, worse, they see us, the shamans, as working with demonic ideas. We're working with sacred sites, working with our ancestors. They're told that this is bad, that this is evil. And so it's separating us from our children, and they're becoming foreign to us. And they're not following our traditions. They're not interested in our tradition. And these missionaries have also brought foreign crops, crops that we don't know, that the soils don't know, crops that we have never eaten before, but we're losing our own. Because as our people go to the church, so their minds start to change. So they start to reject our traditions. And they start to believe in the God of the missionaries who say that's the only way. And so we're also losing our sense of community, that there's some people who've become very influenced by the thinking of the missionary people. And we as the shamans and the people who are responsible for our community, we're not able to do what we're meant to do anymore. And we cannot influence our people anymore. And because of the church, the people go to the church, and then in that way they access the shop. Because of that, there's more and more people coming to stay in the different places where the church and the shop is. And that means there's too many people living together in one place in the forest. So the forest is being destroyed because there's more and more gardens, too many together. There's fishing in just a small area, and the fish are going with the people in their next generation, people who are incarnated at this time. But they had seen how the people in the Amazon had found a way to reconnect their people to their ancestry. And so these ancestors from far away said, we want you to help us. And Ricardo said, I don't know where these ancestors are from, but I thought you people have these connections, maybe you know. And so we said to them, well, yes, in fact, I'm from Africa, as you know. And I said, in fact, we have been thinking with people in Africa across the ocean that maybe there's a way that they can learn from you. So it feels like this is a calling. It feels like this is something that's coming into our minds and coming through dreams and ancestral communication. So let's explore this. So we then gathered some people who I knew in Africa, who I felt would be open to these ideas. And we took them over to meet Ricardo and the other shamans. And it was in that meeting, that gathering, that Ricardo and the other shamans explained what their journey for the last 10 or 12 years had been and where they were at that point. So Ricardo explained to our African friends who were, some of them were lawyers, some of them were sangomas, like shamans, spiritual leaders from here, and some community people. It was a mixed group, just a few. It was about, I think, 8 people. And so Ricardo and the shamans explained how they did not know whether it was possible to revive their traditions, but they began the journey. And he said, we began, and what I'll explain to you is what we learned about how to bring back our tradition. And he said, first, we started with a very small group of people, of shamans and spiritual leaders and women who felt a deep concern and pain about losing our traditions and losing our community and our forest. And so from that deep concern, we reflected on how it used to be. How did we used to live when we were back in our communities, when we were back in our melokas, which are these big communal houses, which I know you have in Sabah and other places, big communal houses, round, some of them square, some of them from different traditions. And everything in that communal house has a meaning, symbolizes the universe, or symbolizes parts of the way the forest is organized. And in the center of these big melokas is the spiritual place, the place of connecting with ancestors. And so these melokas, which had started to disappear with the missionaries, we had to remember how we built them. Some of us still remembered, but many had forgotten. So we spent a lot of time remembering how did we used to build them, what was the meaning of the structures of our meloka. And as our memory came back, so our confidence came back that we could do this. But he said what we learned that was so important was the depth of our conversation with people who were deeply concerned and connected with our ancestors started to draw in others. And he said we had people coming, some of our people had left when the missionaries came, and some of them had gone to other countries, and they came back, they were drawn back. And some of the people in our community who we thought we'd lost wanted to come and wanted to participate. He said, so we learned that the power of this deep knowledge, it calls the spirit of people. It's not by talking to them and persuading them. It's by these deep conversations that have an energy to draw others in. So he said, we continued regularly to gather and to reflect and to remember and to see if we could start to bring things back. And as we did this, so people started from the community, our different people started to come and to join us. And he said eventually we got to the point where we were able to go back to our original places where our melokas, our traditional houses, were along the river, because we were dispersed along the river before the missionaries came. So we started to go back to our ancestral lands. We were able to build again our melokas. He said the women were reflecting on the seeds and the crops that they used to have, the meaning, the rituals around them. And then they would remember that somebody had a few of the old seeds left, and then they'd share them, and then they'd bulk them up. And so slowly the seeds started to come back. And so when we moved back to our different places along the river, we reestablished our traditional gardens, and we did the rituals to open them in the forest and to welcome back the seeds into the forest. And then we also were able to teach the young people who also start to join us how to fish, and the young woman how to plant. So now the young people started to come as we moved back to our village. And we also were able to, after a while, to bring back the way our rites of passage for the young people, so that they learn the ways of becoming an adult, so that they learn the laws of the forest, which are the laws that govern us. And so those have come back too in our different communities. And he said the other thing that we did, which was a lot of work, was we realized that now we do need schools, but we need our own schools. And in order to really think about what kind of schools do we need, because things have changed. We didn't used to have schools. Our children would learn from us as we did things. But now we're facing a different world. So he said we work together with our friends from the outside white world to understand what is this idea of school, where you put children in boxes and you shove information into their minds. Is that really, where does that come from? And so by understanding the story of origin of how these things called schools emerged, we were able to also reflect on how we see education. And so we have developed now our own schools where our children learn in the forest. If they want to learn about fish, then they go and they go to the river and they learn how the fish behave and what they eat, and they learn how to fish. And then we do introduce things that from the white world. We do introduce mathematics and Spanish, foreign language, but we need to learn how to communicate with the outside world. So we have integrated some of the things that we feel we need our children to learn from the outside world. But by going and learning about fish, they can learn about mathematics. They can count the bones of the fish. So for us, a school is a living experience, because we believe that our children are born with a calling, with a gift, and we need to nurture the gift out of our children and not fill them with information as if they've got nothing in their mind. So we worked hard to develop our own schools, and also with health. The idea that a sickness, you just take a pill, is so foreign to us. For us, if a person is ill or if something is going on in the community or in the forest, it's a sign that something's out of balance. And we need to find out what is the imbalance. What's the cause of the imbalance in the person, or if something's going on in the community, or if there's a disturbance in the territory. And then we see what medicine is needed. It could be a ritual, it could be a plant medicine. And that's part of our governance, because our governance is about us as humans governing ourselves so that we live in harmony with our ancestral land, with our forests. And if there's a disturbance, we have to bring the balance back. So for us, governance is everything. Governance is how we manage our healing and our health, how we manage our relationship with the land, how we follow the laws that the land gives us, how we teach our children how to live in the forest and the laws of the forest and the ways of the forest. All of this for us is governance. And it's held by the spiritual leaders who are in communication with the ancestors and with the land and with the sacred sites, which were demonized by the missionaries. But the sacred sites are essential. They're the potent spiritual portals, places in the land. And so our communion and our rituals with the sacred sites are also a central part of our governance. And that communication comes through our spiritual leaders. And all of that happens through communication with the forest and through communication in the center of our meloka, our communal house with the ancestors, when we have our dialogues at night and we communicate with each other and we call in the ancestors. So he said to our African friends, this is a short version of the long, long story. And this is how we learned that it's possible to bring back our traditions, that it's from that place of being connected with our ancestors and our forest and our whole identity, which is our relation with the forest and our relation with our ancestors. From that place, we can then see how we can navigate, how we can relate to the outside world and not be devoured and swamped by it. But we have to keep that spiritual call, that spiritual practice, which really is what holds us with our ancestors. So he said to our friends, this has been our experience. I had this dream. You are here. If you go back and you see if perhaps if you start to speak to your knowledgeable elders and you share the story, perhaps something will happen. Perhaps it'll trigger something. And you can see if the journey that we've been on is helpful for you. So that was how Ricardo explained the journey that we've been on and passed the story over to our African friends. And some of the films that I sent to you are about what happened in the Amazon, and in Africa, learning from the Amazon, and we'll look at the one called Custodians of Life a bit later. But I want to tell you a third dimension to this long story, and that is how Thomas Berry, who entered our lives, entered our journey, who was, because he's an ancestor now, a cultural historian from the US. He'd lived in China, he'd thought a lot, he'd read a lot, he'd contemplated a lot, and he'd connected deeply with indigenous people. And it was at about the same time as Ricardo had his dream, we also connected with him and had a lot of kind of small discussions with him, introduced him to some of the people from the Amazon, not Ricardo, unfortunately, but we told Ricardo about the story. And so there was a lot of resonance between what Thomas Berry had been thinking and what was going on in the Amazon and starting to emerge in Africa. And for Ricardo, when he heard about Thomas Berry and his thinking, he said that he felt that that the ancestors are speaking to us in different ways in different parts of the world. And the message is coming in different ways, but it's from the same spirit. And essentially what Thomas Berry was saying, and I'll give you just a brief taste of that. I'll give you a sort of, I'll share with you an experience I had with him when he was talking to people, because it was quite a dramatic one. And that was that he was speaking to this group of people, and he was at that stage, he was quite fragile. He was in his 80s, I think. And he sort of walked up to the podium to speak, and he looked quite fragile. And I thought, wow, is he going to manage this? And he turned around and he stood up, and in a powerful, booming voice, he said, "We are living in the terminal phase of the industrial growth society." And he said, every civilization has a cycle. But he said, civilizations that have destroyed the very foundations of life inevitably collapse. He said, the challenge we face is that this dominant industrial growth economy has reached into the furthest parts of our planet. And so this industrial growth economy is threatening the very well-being, the very life of our living planet. he said, this is a very critical and dramatic time for us to be alive. And he said, I believe that we are called, those of us who are awakening, we are called to work to transform our the dominant human-centered consciousness to an earth-centered consciousness. And he said the belief of the industrial system, the two most dangerous, there's many dangerous beliefs, but two really dangerous beliefs of the industrial growth economy are that humans are superior and that nature is a bunch of resources, a collection of objects to be exploited for the benefit of humans. He said it's this belief that is leading to the many crises that we're facing today. And he said this earth consciousness is to come back home, to realize that we are a communion of subjects, that the earth is alive, that every being that exists on this planet has an inherent right to be, to have habitat, to participate in the evolutionary process. And it is completely against life to feel that one species can dominate and obliterate others. So he said, we have to work. The great work is to bring back our consciousness, our connection, our embeddedness in the web of life, our understanding that Mother Earth, our Earth, is the primary text of the laws that govern life on our planet. Our Earth is the primary text. He said, as Indigenous people know and do, our laws should be derived from the laws of nature, because the laws of nature govern life. And we as a species need to govern ourselves so that we do not violate nature's laws, but we comply with her laws. And in order to know nature's laws, we need to re-embed ourselves in the web of life to understand how our relatives live, how we live with them. What are the laws and the processes and the ways of life that sustain us? And part of what has happened, a core sickness that has happened, is that we have lost our relationship, our connection with our very source of life, Mother Earth. And that's how we violate. If we don't have relationship, we violate. And so he said, we need to learn the language of nature. We need to recultivate our relationship, our embeddedness in nature. And then he said, as Indigenous people say, the law is written in the heart. If we are in relationship with nature, with a tree in our garden, with a meadow, as in the case of Thomas Berry, and something is about to violate the tree or the meadow or the forest we love, it hurts us because we love that place and we cannot allow it to happen. And we see how the deep relationship that Indigenous communities have with their territory, what happens for them is we lose our forest, we lose ourselves. We are the forest, we're part of the forest. So Thomas Berry said, how do we cultivate that consciousness, that relationship? That is really the root of the problem we're facing with the industrial world, is this incredible disconnection, fragmentation, alienation. We come back to who we are as humans when we reconnect with a larger family, the earth community, as he said. We are part of the earth community, and when we cut away from the earth community, we diminish ourselves and our humanity, as we see by the destruction and the mayhem caused by this industrial growth economy. So he then advocated for this word earth jurisprudence, which is really saying the philosophy of law that comes from the living earth. So he said that earth jurisprudence is the understanding of law that comes from indigenous people. So within our human consciousness, we're able to understand that law is not something that people invent. Law is something, the earth is lawful and ordered. The earth is the primary text. And so earth jurisprudence is the true nature of law for those living on planet Earth, and not human created law. And of course, all of this is what resonated with Ricardo and his shamans when we communicated Thomas Berry's ideas. And that's why he's become so important for us, because he wrote this book, The Great Work, which critiques what he calls the petroleum era. And as somebody from the industrial world, critiquing the industrial world, he knows how to communicate to those in the industrial world, to appeal to an awakening consciousness and to a sense of understanding, or at least respect for indigenous ways, and hopefully an inspiration to learn that we as modern humans also have our indigenous ancestry that we can draw on. Now, I think I'm going to stop there because I'm worried about time running away, and I've been talking a lot. So my suggestion is that we reflect a bit, and then maybe at the end I can draw together just some of the practices that we do and that we teach our people here to try and really get back into that embeddedness in nature, in the ancestral world, and in human community. But
yeah, thanks for your story. Like some of your stories really related very much close to me, to like what happened like in previous weeks to where I went. But I don't know if anyone wants to reflect first.
Yeah, thanks for all your insights, because I think there's a lot of relations to the work that we do here and the communities that we live. There's a lot of similarities. And I just want to touch on, you were mentioning, the industrial era, right? How basically development is, the new age of life, but now we're trying to revert back and slow down a bit. But a lot of the complexities here within the communities and the custodians that we work with, they tend to have a bit of a conflict with a lot of their own internal communities, where they're saying, why are you going against development when it's helping our own communities, right? Why do you put forth the environment and the wildlife over your own people? And a lot of times, we try to work with them, hear their issues and aspirations, and we work with also those that are bringing harm to the environment, like the private companies around. But it's such a gray area where the communities themselves are wanting the development, and yet we are still trying to preserve it. So do you have any advice for some of our our colleagues that are facing these issues?
yeah, boy, I know that very well. It's really, it's what the Amazonians faced, because those who were caught into the missionary thing, and then the schools, and then wanted jobs, and the whole disaster. There was that tension with those who wanted what the Western world offered. And certainly in Africa, it's a huge issue. And, I think for me, the key, and what we do here in the African context, where the dominance of religion has just gone deeply into people, and also the complex of being poor and needing money and all that stuff. So what we do here in the African context is that we really focus on telling the story of the Amazon to spiritual leaders, to the elders, to the custodians who are in pain about what they're seeing. And then if they are inspired by the story, to start small with the spiritual leaders, or quite a lot of the work is with women around seed and food. Now, what we find is that when you, as the Amazonian said, when you start small and you really talk about the deep tradition, it does draw people into the work, because indigenous practices are very practical. So, for example, what we're finding in around Africa is the traditional seeds have come back. I mean, they have brought the traditional seeds back, they're planting them, they're bringing back the related rituals for before planting and for after planting, for the harvesting. They're having seed festivals that everybody loves, even the sort of politicians, they all love to eat these traditional foods. And then when there's drought or flood, the traditional crops are produced, there's a harvest, and the non-traditional ones there isn't. So the practical nature of the bringing back the indigenous practices starts to influence others and even other communities. And with the spiritual work around sacred sites, that starts small, and then eventually the priority is, as the work develops, is to protect those sacred places. Now, I don't know if you have similar where you are, but the sacred places are the critical places in the ecosystem, as well as being sacred, spiritually potent. And what we find is it's like developing a counter way of thinking and a counter force to the dominant, we need development, we need money kind of scenario. And what they find is when they have their traditional crops, they have enough food, therefore they save money because they're not buying the seeds and the fertilizers. And they're able to produce enough to exchange and to generate some income. And in some of the communities, the traditional crafts have come back. So they're able to sell some of those crafts. And so you're starting to develop another way to generate an income. The dances and the rituals come back. So it's not that counter force of you're going backwards, you know, we need development, we need the ATMs, and we need all these things. It's not that you stop that voice, but you start to allure more and more people to see that this, the tradition, going back to the traditions, is really what can sustain them and build back their community cohesion. And COVID actually was a very interesting test, because what happened in COVID is those voices that say, what are you doing? You're going backwards, who mainly urban people and also some locals, when they came, they had to escape the urban areas, they came back to the rural areas, and there was food there. So they were dependent on their backward rural relatives for food. By then, the elders and the shamans were much stronger. And so they said, we need to do a ritual to protect the land and to protect us from COVID. And even though non-believers in the tradition offered something for the ritual. So it's a slow and difficult journey, we find. It's not easy to deal with that counter voice, but the stronger the traditions we have found, the stronger the traditions come back, the more of a counter force it provides for that other voice. So one more thing, in Uganda, there's a hunter turned protector of wildlife, and he is so pained by the fact that there's no wildlife in the territory anymore. And so he was trying to protect a few antelope, and then people came in and they killed the antelope, and he was completely heartbroken, and he decided to give up. And we really had to work with him to kind of bring back his confidence and to find a way. So it's finding those voices in the community of somebody like him as a hunter who sees the importance of bringing back the proper well-being of the land. It's a bit of it's not an easy answer, as you see. It's a long journey, but we find that in the end, it's never, that other voice never goes, but it's building up enough based on the tradition, enough support and enough of counter voice, I would say. I don't know, does that help? Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Kenneth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that.
But it's, I mean, I'd love to talk more with you and sort of see in context, because, you know, this is a learning journey for all of us. I mean, we're all facing similar but different contexts. And I think it's really the spiritual core and calling in the ancestors that for us is the thing that helps us deal with the challenges as they emerge. So sorry, if I can say one more thing. Also, when we face challenges, we ask the shamans or the custodians of sacred sites to just dream, think, ask the ancestors, how do we work with this? And it's incredible how ways come.
A few of us watched one of the resources that you shared a couple of days ago, and there was this quote that struck us. So this person in the video, he said, "If we don't share our grief, we will die." And I don't, and I wonder if you're able to help us unpack that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. So what we find is when we tell, so part of our methodology here in Africa, as we're learning from the Amazon, is to tell the Amazon story. When we're connecting with, when I say we, I'm meaning sort of the group that we work with who are working with communities. And so they tell the story of the Amazon to their elders, or to the community. And I've done the same as a white person going into community, telling the Amazon story. And what we find is the response from the community is, it's exactly the same here. We're losing our children. They don't respect us. We've given up hope. I mean, a whole lamentation. And what we feel is important about telling the story in order to open permission, if you like, for them to express their own exasperation, is so many of the elders have given up hope, just as the Amazonians were about to. And so when they hear a similar story, they can relate. It triggers their own pain, but it's a hopeful story. And so what we teach in the people who use this methodology is that response, that lamentation, that all that sadness and the frustration and the pain that comes out is a critical part of the healing. For it is critical that the community, and especially the elders, are able to lament about the pain and the suffering that is all internalized because of all these development projects that come and impose stuff on them. So that space to allow them, and that's part of the purpose of the story, is to allow that out. And that can go on, quite a lot. I mean, you can have a number of dialogues and the lamentation is still happening, or you're remembering stuff, and it's very present. But it's important to encourage that to come out, and then after it's come out, then they can sort of focus on, okay, what can we do, and is this something that you would like to do, to explore whether in your own community we could explore what would, bringing back the tradition. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does actually.
Yeah. Does it relate to what you're thinking?
Yeah. It also makes me want to ask another question, if you don't mind.
No, of course not.
How much do you believe our relationship with Earth can heal sort of our relationship with one another?
Ah, yes. a good one. I think it's absolutely connected. I mean, I'm sure we can all share stories of our connection to nature, but for me, nature opens my heart. I've got porcupines who live here, and I was looking at them last night. I just love them to pieces. My heart just melts. I mean, birds, everyone does that to me, but porcupines are just such wonderful, crazy creatures, and I'm developing a relation with them. So that opens my heart. Or when I'm here at the sea and swimming, it's so beautiful. And I think when you connect with nature, there's a humility. And we talk a lot about humility in our work, being humble, being simple, in the way we relate to communities, in the way we relate to each other. And I think as the Amazonians said, but as many of the indigenous people say, and Thomas Berry said, it's that love that when you're in relationship with nature, it opens the heart. And it's the love of nature that then isn't just love of nature, it's a way of being, because you're connected to the beauty of this whole. And then, when in working with the community, it's how can we emulate what we see in nature and also what we see in indigenous communities. Not that indigenous communities are these perfect, angelic humans, but they just have a way of centering the good of the whole. How do we work together for the good of the community? How do we work together for the good of our life support system? So I think nature helps us to realign ourselves with our embeddedness in a bigger community and understand the well-being. Our own well-being is dependent on the well-being of the bigger community, be that a human community, but that human community is embedded in the bigger community. So what we find in the trainings that we do with people who come, been, as we tease each other, brainwashed in that other way, is that the love and the care grows when these practices grow. So I think that they're completely connected, because I think when what the industrial system does is it alienates us into these little individual humans who have to struggle to survive and jump, sort of tread on each other. When we're embedded in the web of life, we're embedded in a bigger community that we feel that we're held by, and that our well-being is dependent on the well-being of the bigger wholes.
This is more on a personal question, I guess. So this year I joined a group where we try to revive back our traditional stories, to revive back in for us. I think I related so much in the story that you tell about the missionaries coming in, taking away the stories that was originally there, changing it with their stories. So that's where a group of young people passionate with elders, also with a group of shamans, we gathered, and then we're trying to revive back their story, the shaman's story, their practice, their chants, which is a story handed down through in a form of chant songs, all handed down from their grand ancestors. So from that workshop, we had 2 workshops now. But in one of the workshop, someone took one of the chants, one of the stories, and then perform it outside with a different context, in a form, I would say it's like a form of a dark tourism aspect, where everything turned into more trying to wake something up, which is not in the original story context of what the chant is about. So I'm not sure if you have ever faced, or you and your community have ever faced something like that, and if you ever, I don't know how you moved, how the community moved move forward with that.
So what you're saying is somebody took a chant and then sang it or gave it to others who were not part of the community.
Yes.
Yeah. No, we're very strong on that. So that's why we train people in the sort of ethics of this work, because for us, the work is not for us, as we call ourselves, animators. It's for the community. It's for the community to revive their ways and their practices and their tradition. Because Indigenous knowledge is a very practical, it's how you live in the world. And so when we train people who are animators, even if they're from the community and they've been out and they've been Western educated and now they've had a calling to go back to their roots, it's absolutely, the ethic is we do not write anything. We do not put anything out into the world without the permission of the community. And we also are very clear about sacred knowledge is knowledge that has to be earned according to Indigenous ways of thinking. And that we have to earn the capacity to learn about sacred things. And the elders have to guide that. So it's a completely different ethic from the Western world, where you can extract stuff and put it anywhere. And writing, we're very strong on writing, because writing freezes the story. And stories are oral in Indigenous traditions. And the point is that they're living and they're told in a context, and they're told because they are teaching stories. And they're stories that bring, the spirit, the ancestors in. And these are sacred stories. And so I think having a very strong ethic around how we work with Indigenous people, that this is their story, their knowledge, their chants that happen in a certain context. And they are not for the public domain. And, there's all this interest, Indigenous knowledge, this is the best thing, we have to document. And for us, what's the point of documenting? You have to live it. And each culture is different. And so it's bringing that living tradition back to life, which the people do themselves. And we are just accompanying them and learning and having the privilege of journeying with them. And if you're from your own tradition, if this is in your own tradition, the elders will have certain laws, if you like, of how you can learn the stuff and how you can use it. And sometimes they need a bit of confidence building around, how were these stories shared? How did you learn them traditionally in the old times? And what are the laws around when and how we sing the chants or tell the stories?
I'm really enjoying the conversation that we
Yes. Okay. No, that's fine. Because we could, a film is something, hopefully you'll be inspired to look at it. It is a beautiful film about the custodians of sacred sites. Look, I know you've seen it, Noel, but and Natasha, I think you've seen it. But it's just to give you a little thing about it. For me, it's very touching to see the film, because the shaman, the custodians of sacred sites, when we began the work, they were so timid, they would hardly speak. And the film ends up with Alon, who's the real elder custodian. And he gives a message to the world. And for me, it just melts my heart when I think of this very timid guy who wouldn't say anything, and now he's giving a message to the world. So that's for me the beauty of what happens in this work, of how these people who've been demonized and repressed and told that they're backward and uneducated, and yet they know how important this knowledge and these practices are. And so to just see how they can give this message to the world was just beautiful. So I would encourage you to look at it because I think it is very inspiring.
One of the thing I saw in the film, there was this map that they made, circular
Yeah.
map. It was
Yeah.
very it attracted me so much that
Yeah.
it's not like the calendar. It's not like the
Mm-mm.
calendar we always see. Can you help us unpack a bit of what the map is
Yes,
about?
sure. And it would be something maybe one day we could do together because this also emerged in the Amazon.
Mhm.
So just a quick story about that. Everything has a story, as you know.
Yes.
So after a certain period of reviving the knowledge and the practices, they said that they felt it would be good. This is the shamans. They felt it would be good to find a way to get a picture, an image of the land, of the territory, of the forest, and the order of the sacred sites and the places where the fish breed, the whole, the kind of, the order of the territory. So that's in space. But they said the territory changes over time. So how do we reflect the changes in the territory, which are seasonal changes, which are cyclical changes? So they said, there's a calendar. The earth has a calendar, but it's not the calendar in the Western world like this. There's no such thing as this kind of calendar in the real world of nature. The calendar is a cycle. And so we thought and we scribbled ideas. And eventually we came up with this idea of the circle, because the seasons are cyclical, and also how they're concentric circles, because at any moment, what is happening in the cosmos with the stars, that also changes over the seasonal cycle. And then there's the weather, which changes over the seasonal cycle. And then there's what happens in the territory. And then the next circle is what humans do. So we plant and we harvest and we save seeds and we hunt and we fish and we do different things according to what nature tells us. When the seasons change, the frogs start to call and we know that now the rain is coming. Or the leaves start to change and we know that this is another indication of a seasonal change. So we read what is happening with the stars, with the weather, with the forest, and that tells us as humans what we do. And then in the middle of the circle, they're the rituals, because we as humans do rituals to mark certain changes in the seasonal cycle. So there'll be rituals before planting seed. There'll be certain rituals that happen in the sacred sites. Now, some of those are seasonal. So again, they happen in relation to what is going on in the cosmos, in the weather, in the forest, and according to what is happening with the crops and the fishing and the hunting. So it's a beautiful image of so they do the maps, which is the land, which is the space. And then the seasonal calendar is what is happening over time. And when we do these, it's when there's enough knowledge that has been remembered and enough practices are coming back so that they can do a really beautiful ancestral map of the original order of the land, and then the disorder of the present, and then the future map and the future calendar of where they want to go. What is their vision of where they want to be? And of course, with the calendar, you have the order of the past, you have the present disorder, which now you have not only, when they do it, it's usually they haven't got all their crops back yet, or the pesticides are destroying the insects, or, there's disorder. And then, and of course, there's climate change. So the future calendar is, how do we navigate climate change and climate disruption? So that's in a bit of a nutshell. I'd like to finish with just share a few ideas about how the practices that we think are important. So, I mean, we've talked about it, but I thought just to draw it together, you know, the thinking of at least the indigenous people we've been learning from is life has 3 dimensions, which are all interconnected. So there's the world of the human, there's the world of nature, and there's the world of the spiritual ancestral. And each culture has a different way of understanding these, but these are the 3 domains, if you like, that interact. And that the role of the human is to govern ourselves so that we are in harmony with the spiritual world and with the world of nature and within ourselves. So one of the things, as you've heard from Thomas Berry and others, and I think we all realize this, is the big disconnect with nature is something we really need to work on and cultivate in ourselves practices that reconnect us and that re-embed us in the real sense of belonging to the web of life, to nature. And there's various practices that I'm sure you've explored and that we explore, but one of them, for example, is what we call the Gaia sit spot, which is where we have a place that we go to as regularly as we can, where we connect with the place and those who live there, the plants, the animals, the insects, and we get into understanding the relationships and the way that place works. And it's a way of having a meditation space to be fully aware, fully present with that community of nature who lives there. And that's a way to learn the language of nature and to understand her laws, her lawfulness. So that's an ongoing deepening practice that really, as I think we've said, you know, sustains our connection and our humility, so that when we speak and do our work, we are coming from that place of real experiential connectedness, and therefore we can talk with authenticity. So that's one area of practice. The second area of practice is around spiritual practice. And of course, we each find our way in that. But for us in the African context, it's going back to our roots, going back to reconnecting with our ancestry, understanding where we've come from, our stories of origin of our people, and cultivating our own practice. So in the African context, we have ways of invoking the ancestors, and that's the practice that we use in this context. But that ancestral connection, are we okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So that ancestral connection is we feel critical because, you know, our ancestors are with us. Like when I'm talking about Ricardo today, he's with us. I asked him, you know, allow me to be true to your story. I mean, to really live with that sense of the presence of our ancestors in our own lineage and our mentor ancestors, like Thomas Berry and like Ricardo. So when we do our traditional, we use the word prayer, our traditional practices when we meet on Zoom like this as a group, one of us leads that traditional prayer, and we invoke our ancestors to be with us in these dialogues so that we really are speaking and being inspired by them. So it's exploring ways of really living with that understanding that the spiritual ancestral realm is present, the spirits of the land are present. So that's another area of deepening relationship and cultivating. And then, you know, as you raised, I think a number of you, how do we live in human community in a way that is nurturing, that is mutually enhancing, that is generative. I love the word you use, the generative practices that really generate our own authenticity and the calling that we have in this time, in this life. How do we create community like you're doing here? You know, where you share, you're a community of practice, exploring practices. We need that to hold us, you know, to be able to deal with the external world and to see it, the dominant world, but to have a place where these practices and our spirit and our calling and our way can be nurtured. And then, of course, we talk a lot about, I haven't talked so much here, but we talk a lot in our groups about how we need to be vigilant of how the colonial mind or the industrial mind is constantly at us. So watching our language, just being aware of not unconsciously allowing that thinking in. And that's a constant vigilance, that's a constant monitoring. So that we don't get swallowed up by this other world that's very devouring. And then, of course, that we've never faced the kind of challenge we're facing now with a planetary collapse scenario, with our communities so fragmented. And so it's a constant learning journey and a constant journey of learning from each other and calling in the ancestors and exploring and not knowing. But we use a lot the understanding of emergence, which I won't go into now, but it's like with the dialogues or the storytelling, creating conditions where that connection, that interconnection can happen again, because we've been fragmented. So in our learning journey, how do we feel that we're open and present and constantly willing to learn what the universe, what the process is telling us? So that's an antidote to the expert scenario of the Western world. We're never experts, we're always learning. And finally, I want to just quote two quotes. So remember I said the law is written in the heart. And I think that law, when we understand nature, is the primary text. Then when we are in relation with nature, we feel the law in our hearts. And Thomas Berry and others have said a little thing here, which I love, which says, law is necessary where morality has failed. Morality is necessary where love has failed. So I think the essence is when we're in relationship with life, with nature, with each other, it generates a love and a care. And then we act and we think from that place. And that's the law. Simple, really. Those were just a few ideas of how we kind of try and explore how to stay sane in a mad world. Any responses to that before I read my final thing, which is a poem from Thomas Berry? Any other thought or?
I do have, because in the conversation you had with Ken and Cynthia in the email, which they forwarded to me and my team, there was a talk about the Gaia seed spot. And we earlier when we started this session, we did what we practice in one of our mountaintop from a friend called Claire Van der Plank. So she does vision quest, and what we learned from her is to find a seed spot where we put our attention to the seed spot. So that now that we have another one, the Gaia seed spot from you, I would like to ask for if later after this we would like to go out to that seed spot we did on the first day. Is there a prompt that you would like us to that we can do after this?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good idea. So what I discussed with Ken and Cynthia when you were going to be at the mountaintop was on your way to where you are now. But you could do it now because I can see this beautiful forest around you. So the way we explore this is we say, if you go outside and just feel drawn, just follow your feelings of where you are drawn to sit. Or if you've got a place that you already know, you could go to that. But it's this trying to sort of, we're so taught to be in control. And so it's trying to enable us to just feel drawn, not with your mind, but with your heart or your feet. Just see where you're drawn. And then just be there. Now, the idea of really our relation with nature, and in this case with a sit spot, is to be fully present. So it's like a meditation with nature in the sense that when you're there, easily the mind can go off onto all sorts of chat. You can be thinking about this, or the mind goes off. So it's bringing us back to be present to that place and to really observe with all of our senses. So it's seeing what's there, it's feeling what's there, maybe the textures, it's smelling. It's using all of our senses to experience the place and to relate to the place. There's a wind or a breeze. You see it in the trees, you feel it on your skin, you feel how that breeze is connecting us. Just that practice of being as present, you know what I mean by present, like really there fully and not distracted. So it's a constant coming back and noticing. And, it's like that thing of embedding. Oh, look at those ants going over there. Where are they going? It's just like really being in there and learning that language. How is everybody relating to each other? And it's that practice of being fully attentive and using all of our senses. So that's the foundation. And then just to add for future, if you ever wanted to use it, sometimes we also say, if we've got a number of days, we say, today let's be in our place, our Gaia sit spot, and reflect on the element of water, for example. So the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. And so over a few days you can do that. And that just is a little way of guiding you to go a bit deeper into those elements and how they too weave us together. So, one can play with this, but in our regular practice, it's about really being fully conscious, fully present with all of our senses and going into how is this, all these different creatures, how are they relating to each other? What are they teaching us? What is their language? Okay, so do you think it's time for me to read you a short poem?
Yes, please.
Charles Berry was also a poet. So he says, this poem is to all the children, to the children who swim beneath the waters of the sea, to those who live in the soils of the earth, to the children of the flowers in the meadows and the trees of the forest, to all those children who roam over the land, and the winged ones who fly with the winds, to the human children too, that all the children may go together into the future in the full diversity of their regional communities.
Thank you very much, Liz, for spending your time with us and sharing your wonderful stories. It was really inspiring and it's really great.
Well, thank you. I loved your questions, and I wish I was sitting there with you and going into that forest and then coming back to share what you experienced. I mean, I just love what you guys are doing, and I'm very excited, and I hope one day we can connect and share more stories and more conundrums, more challenges. We need to learn together.